Hello, Peter.
Oh, hi, Johnny.
Hello to you. How are you?
Pretty good. Little frustrated.
Yes, I'm.
Still having to work from home, and still waiting to hear from the Arts Council.
To have all this creative endeavour on hold, it must be infuriating.
Well, it is, and the other thing is that apart from the organisation and trying to bring art, the public, and landscape back together, there's a human dimension to it because we can't open without bringing staff back, and we can't really commit to bringing staff back until we know we've got a way of funding them.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating all around, but we will get there. We'll get there.
Absolutely, and the guidebook, which no doubt you'll be writing off the back of this, is going to be invaluable for museum directors and curators again in the future. God forbid we have anything else.
Yeah.
Like
I hope
this again.
I hope somebody listens. The big problem, in life in general, is people seem to have short memories, don't they?
Yep.
Once you've got over one crisis, they tend to forget about it. But anyway.
To another.
But you seem to be going ahead now, which is great.
And I will send you some photographs that were done this morning of the studio, more or less now in its finished state. I think it is in its finished state, ahead of our intention to open up to a limited access for the public. And I suppose long memories, is really all the more important now, isn't it? We look back over time. You knew this building many years back from its original incarnation at Willand, I think, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I got to know Liz. Obviously, I knew about her as an artist, from when I was a student. But I got to know her in the early 80s. Yes, I think it was about 1980, 1981, something like that. I first got to know her.
Yeah.
And she'd started. It was quite interesting because by that time she was totally into landscape and totally committed to rural life. And they'd bought, her and her third husband Alex had bought Willand in Dorset.
Yes.
And they had the space there to develop studios and workshops, but also to use the landscape, so she could actually just take a piece of sculpture out of the studio and put it straight into the landscape to see what it looked like, which was very much what Henry Moore did at Peregrine, but on a much bigger scale. And that was the first time she'd ever really been able to do that. And she was absolutely delighted with the studio. The studio, when I got to know her, was more or less brand new. It had been designed by her son-in-law.
Was that Michael Sharkey? Yeah.
Yes, and she was absolutely delighted with it. So the whole of my the whole time I knew Liz, she was really enamored, fascinated by landscape, not just as a source of inspiration, but as a place to actually locate her sculpture. And I think that was a very new development, and the studio had a big influence on that. Because it was white. It was white everywhere. But she had the space there, to work on a much bigger scale and to saw limbs off large sculptures and arms off large sculptures and then place them on other sculptures. And she also had outside the studio these torsos, lining they were lined up on the ground outside, and she would sort of reassemble them. It was quite interesting the way she worked.
Sort of bolting pieces together.
Crucial role in the way that Liz thought about sculpture. She had a very active mind. She liked to work. I mean, one of the reasons why plaster was so important to her was the opportunity to respond swiftly.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you're carving, or indeed you're modelling with clay, you can't respond as quickly, and so the fluidity of the material matched the fluidity of her thinking, and obviously, she I wouldn't say she slowed down, but there was perhaps slightly more thoughtful approach, more where she started to reassemble different parts of parts from different sculptures. She also then was using plaster on a much larger scale, so she could actually carve into the plaster, and that actually changed. I mean, she started that much earlier, but she did it on a much larger scale at Wooland.
Yeah.
And you can actually see that in the works, in the later works, in the Riachi warriors, in the heads, the desert heads,
absolutely.
The seated figure, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Those sort of chiselled marks where you kind of created the positive, then you're going back negatively into the plaster, chipping away.
That's right. Yes, I think that it was almost like a combination of two methods of working. She would use an axe, she would use chisels, she'd use saws and things of that sort. But there was a much greater attempt with the later works to have a sort of more modelled...
Take us there in your mind and in your words to some of the moments together in this studio. It seems a pertinent moment just to think about that discipline and intent.
Well, she didn't really like she didn't like people watching her work.
Okay.
So I wasn't I was rarely there when she was actually
in process,
deeply involved.
Yeah.
But the discipline, I think, was always there. She like most artists, they just want to get in the studio.
Yeah.
Nothing will stand in the way of that. I mean, Liz was a very kind, very family-oriented person who had a lot of interest in life and supported a lot of causes and things like that. But her first interest in the morning was to get into the studio and stay there as long as possible. Yeah. And she was quite social, and very, as I say, very family-oriented. One of the things about Wooland was it gave them the opportunity to bring the whole family together.
Yes.
Alex Sarki's mother lived there, and Liz's mother lived there.
Yeah.
She talked about the bookends, at the end, at one end of the building, they had a house for Liz's mother, and at the other end they had a house for Alex's mother.
Yes.
And so they used to bring the whole family together, and quite often, on a weekend, you'd have a very enjoyable dinner, and sometimes on an evening, quite a boozy time. But the next day, she was always there, in the studio. Yeah. And she would, I visited the studio many times, but you usually talk about the work, just to see what actually was going on.
Yeah.
Once she started the work, she really liked to be on her own.
On her own and focused. And I look at this studio which is around me, and I hope for the day when you can stand here as well and feel whether it brings back memories. But I think of it primarily, as you were saying earlier, as a place of work in plaster, and that material. Do you think we've perhaps overlooked it as a kind of as a source to interrogate in terms of artistic intent, or is it something that we've always known about and perhaps now we're not aware that they existed to such degree? I was thinking primarily of the work that's coming to you, I think.
Yes, it's a really good question, and I think it's got a wider application, really, because many artists treasure their plasters. It's quite interesting. Last year, I was in Spain at an opening of an exhibition of plasters from many different periods in art, and there was a particular group there from the Miro family, and Miro had treasured these plasters. He really looked after them, and they were amazing. They were so powerful. And I think with Frink, with Liz, she probably did the same. I mean, she destroyed, when she was making portraits, she destroyed the clay piece, but would hold on to the
plaster.
Onto the plaster.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, in some instances, she was hoping that she might be able to have them cast in bronze. But I think the plasters probably meant as much to her as the actual finished work. She couldn't. Obviously, you can't show plasters in the open air, and they are a bit difficult to look after and show in galleries as well.
Absolutely.
But again, going back to Miro, last year we helped to organise an exhibition of Miro sculptures in Germany, and we took over 2 of the plasters we have, and they look fantastic.
Yes.
They really look fantastic. Yes. You know, they look more powerful than the actual bronze sculptures. And the thing about the plasters is you really do get the hand of the artist. You get all the markings. You get all the you get all the thinking, all the tactile qualities and things like that the artist has been concerned with. And I think the thing with Liz, one of the things she was really interested in was what happens under the surface. When you look at her sculptures, particularly some of the work she did when she was in France or around that period, the running man, the standing man. They have it's very much what is happening beneath the surface. They don't have a lot of texture, and it's that sort of expressive force. And when she's making it, when she's making the sculpture, it's almost like a document, if you like, of her feelings, which eventually take on a surface. And sometimes, these were very smooth surfaces, sometimes they're a crusty surface, etc. But I think that in that sense, the plasters hold more of the documentation, in terms of how the art came about. Absolutely. And where it started and where it ended up, than the actual finished bronze. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it makes complete sense to me. And one of the most insightful things, it depends on which direction you want to take in terms of understanding and approaching an artist and an artist's work. But it seems to me to be a treasure trove, really, of information to help better understand thought and process, and by extension obviously the finished object. I mean, the plasters have no.
By Tony Caro, and the non-referential, non-figurative work, which I admire. I mean, it's terrific. I mean, Tony was a good friend of mine, and I think he was a great artist. But it seemed to me such a shame that the likes of Frink and other artists, maybe Armitage as well, were overlooked, were ignored, because there was a sort of new direction taking place in British art. But the thing about Liz Frink is she, never lost her integrity. She never lost her belief. She was, as I said earlier, she's a very disciplined person.
Yeah.
And she knew what she wanted. And she was never, going to be influenced by stylistic fashion or what was actually going on in the art world. And she, stuck to her beliefs.
Guns. I think.
And, sorry.
No, I was really just in total concurrence with your sentiment there, because I'm looking out through those blue doors now into our gallery space, seeing the wonderful large desert quartet head, and thinking how resolutely she'd sculpt them, and almost with a sense of without any fear, as you say. And sometimes with artists you can feel the adaptation to contemporary fashion or to contemporary demands, but they seem to be unaffected by that. So that was my.
Yeah, totally. I mean, she was. She was. I think without fear. I think that's a good way of putting it, actually, because she did. She gambled against all sorts of things. I mean, she used to teach at St. Martin's, actually, and then when St. Martin's established, their new school of sculpture under Tony and Philip King and Bill Tucker and people like that. Yeah. She was no longer. She never felt comfortable there anymore. So she didn't continue. But she did continue with her approach. Yeah. And it's not an academic approach. She just believed in the power of the figure, as opposed to the power of the non-figurative approach. And that's what she stayed with throughout her life. Yeah. And I was thinking about this morning, actually, that when you look at her standing figures or her running figures, and you look at some of the heads, they have particularly the running figures, they have a sense of survival about them. They look sort of passive when you first glance at them, but when you look more closely, you can see that there's an intensity there, and there's a sense of survival. And I think that sense of survival in those works matches, the enduring nature of her work.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why, it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. It's not going the other way.
No,
people are getting much more interested in it, and I think it really is beginning to come into its own. Yeah. So the timing, I think, is really good.
Well, that's very, very prescient and insightful of you to say, and I concur completely about the emotive content and the power of it through the figurative language, which is showing, as you say, its strength. And thank you so much for sharing this with us. I just dream of a time when you can see it and come round and enjoy it.
Well, we should. We should be able to get there.
I think between now and October.
We've been very cautious at the moment, but
rightly so.
Yeah, we should be able to get there. Well, I want to get there anyway. I want to see it. I think the studio says so much about where Liz was trying to get. Yeah. And Wooland, it was her dream that would become a sculpture park for her work.
Really?
And it's so sad it never happened. I mean, that's why they bought it. You know?
Yeah.
And when she died, they were, I mean, off the record, they were not financially as secure as she thought they were. They had quite a few problems. And we did try with Lon.
Yeah.
To keep it going and to turn it into a museum, gallery for Frink, but it just wasn't possible.
No, I mean, you feel like if we were starting that now, we could have had the chance to do it. But as you say, back then there was too many hurdles.
I think we could do it now. Actually.
Yeah. I think it'd be a wonderful thing. Well, the studio has, it's got its own journey to make now. So
great.
We'll hope to do something.
Well, if you want, if there's anything that springs to mind and you want me to comment or respond, then just let me know and I'll do it.
Thank you so much. No, it's been lovely. It's been lovely to share the thoughts with you because, frankly,